There is a ship sitting in the middle of a desert. Not beside a river. Not near a dried-up harbor. A desert. Its rusting steel hull rises from endless sand dunes as if it had been dropped there from the sky. No roads lead to it. No water surrounds it, and yet this vessel was once crossing the Atlantic Ocean. The strangest part is that the ship itself never moved. The coastline did, and once you begin noticing places like this, you start seeing them everywhere. Along beaches, inside deserts, beneath ancient pyramids, even in places where the ocean disappeared entirely. They are reminders that the world shown on modern maps is only a temporary version of reality. Because coastlines move, seas vanish, deserts advance, and sometimes the only evidence left behind is a ship standing exactly where it no longer belongs. One of the most famous examples can be found on the western coast of Fuerteventura, one of Spain's Canary Islands. At first glance, it looks like the wreckage of a disaster movie. A gigantic steel hull split in two, rust dripping down its sides, waves crashing against twisted metal. Tourists often assume it has been there for centuries, but the story is surprisingly recent. The vessel was originally launched in 1955. At over 180 meters long, it was among the fastest passenger liners operating in the North Atlantic after World War II. For years it carried thousands of passengers between Europe and North America. Diplomats crossed oceans aboard it. Business executives traveled on it. Families began new lives on distant continents because of it. Then aviation changed everything. Jet aircraft made ocean liners increasingly irrelevant. Crossings that once required days could now be completed in hours. Passenger numbers collapsed. One by one, the great ships of the Atlantic disappeared. Some became cruise ships. Others were scrapped. This one was sold repeatedly, passing through different owners and different plans. Eventually, in 1994, it was being towed toward Southeast Asia. Its future was supposed to be peaceful. There were plans to convert it into a floating hotel, a retirement of sorts, a second life, but it never arrived. Near the Canary Islands, a powerful winter storm swept across the Atlantic. The towing cables snapped. Suddenly, the vessel was alone. No engines, no crew, no control. The ocean took over. For hours, enormous waves pushed the empty ship toward shore. Local fishermen watched in disbelief. Imagine standing on a beach and seeing a structure the size of an apartment building drifting directly toward you. Nothing could stop it. When it finally struck the coastline, the impact tore the hull apart. Steel buckled. The ship split in two. One section sank, the other remained stranded on the beach. And there it stayed. For 3 decades, wind and waves have been dismantling it piece by piece. Yet even today, its remains continue to rise above the sand like the skeleton of a giant creature abandoned by the sea. But that wreck raises an even stranger question. What happens when the sea itself begins to move? Not through storms, not through tides, but through geography. To find the answer, we need to travel nearly 6,000 kilometers south to one of the most hostile coastlines on Earth. The skeleton coast of Namibia. For centuries, sailors feared this place. Some called it the gates of hell. Others simply avoided it whenever possible. The reason becomes obvious when you look at a map. Here, the freezing Benguela Current flows northward from Antarctica. At the same time, scorching desert air rolls westward from the Namib Desert. When the two meet, they create dense fog banks so thick that visibility can drop to almost zero within minutes. For ships navigating the coastline, it was a nightmare. Captains could hear waves. They could hear foghorns, but they could not see land. And when they finally did, it was usually too late. Vessels smashed into hidden sandbars and rocky shores. Many crews survived the initial wreck. Few survived what came next. Because beyond the beach lay hundreds of kilometers of desert. No fresh water, no settlements, no rescue, only sand. The result was one of the largest ship graveyards in history. More than 1,000 vessels have been wrecked along this coast. Most eventually disappeared beneath the dunes. But one became famous for a different reason. The German cargo ship Eduard Bolin ran aground here in September 1909. At the time, waves crashed directly against its hull. The ship sat at the water's edge, exactly where a ship should be. Today, it stands more than 400 meters inland. Surrounded by sand, the Atlantic Ocean is barely visible from its deck. And yet the vessel has not moved. Not even a few meters. The coastline moved instead. Year after year, winds carried sand from inland dunes toward the sea. Layer upon layer accumulated along the shore. A few centimeters each year. Then a few more, and a few more. No single generation noticed the transformation. But after more than a century, nearly half a kilometer of entirely new land had formed. The ship remained in place. The world around it changed. If you traveled back 1,000 years, the coastline would be several kilometers farther east. 10,000 years ago, it would be unrecognizable. The wreck is not just a ship. It is a timestamp, a marker showing where the ocean used to be. And nowhere on Earth does that idea become more unsettling than in Central Asia. Because there, an entire sea vanished before people's eyes. In the middle of the 20th century, the Aral Sea was the fourth largest lake on Earth. It covered nearly 68,000 square kilometers. Fishing fleets crossed its waters. Ports thrived along its shores. Entire cities depended on it. One of those cities was Munak. For generations, the rhythm of life revolved around the sea. Fishing boats departed before sunrise. Factories processed thousands of tons of fish each year. Children grew up believing the water would always be there. Nothing suggested otherwise. Then, in the 1960s, a decision was made hundreds of kilometers away. The rivers feeding the Aral Sea would be diverted to irrigate cotton fields. At first, the effect seemed minor. The shoreline retreated slightly, then a little more, then a little more. Residents assumed the sea would return. It never did. Year after year, the water continued disappearing. Fishing boats had to travel farther to reach open water. Ports found themselves stranded inland. Eventually, the industry collapsed. Factories closed, families left, and the sea kept shrinking. By 2014, the eastern basin of the Aral Sea had effectively disappeared. The transformation was so extreme that astronauts could see it from space. Today, visitors arriving in Munak encounter something that feels almost impossible. Rows of fishing vessels sitting on dry ground, rusting beneath the sun, their windows shattered, their decks covered in dust. Camels wander between them, not because they were transported there, not because someone built a museum, but because the water abandoned them. The ships are exactly where the sea left them. A harbor became a desert in less than a human lifetime. And if that sounds unbelievable, consider what happened off the coast of Ireland in 2020. One morning, residents of a small coastal village woke up to find a cargo ship sitting on the rocks. An 80-meter vessel, intact, silent, apparently abandoned. There had been no distress call, no reports of a ship in trouble, no crew requesting assistance, because there was nobody aboard. The vessel had already been abandoned nearly 18 months earlier. Its engines had failed in the Atlantic Ocean. A rescue helicopter evacuated the crew. The ship was left drifting. Nobody wanted to pay the cost of recovering it, so it remained alone, for more than a year. Storm after storm pushed it across the Atlantic. Ocean currents carried it through thousands of kilometers of open water. Satellites occasionally spotted it, mariners occasionally reported seeing it, yet nobody claimed responsibility. Then one winter night, the Atlantic made its decision. The ghost ship reached Ireland. No captain plotted the route. No navigator selected the destination. The ocean did, and perhaps that is what all these stories have in common. We tend to think of geography as permanent. Maps reinforce that illusion. Coastlines appear fixed. Seas appear eternal. Deserts appear motionless. But the planet is constantly changing beneath our feet. Sometimes slowly enough that nobody notices. Sometimes quickly enough to transform entire civilizations. The ships remain behind as evidence. A wreck stranded in a desert. A cargo ship buried beneath sand dunes. A fishing fleet abandoned by a disappearing sea. A ghost vessel carried across an ocean without a single person on board. Each one captures a moment when the world changed. And that may be the most fascinating thing about abandoned ships. They are not monuments to engineering. They are monuments to time. Because long after ports disappear, rivers change course, and coastlines are redrawn, the ships remain exactly where history left them. Silent, rusting, waiting, like bookmarks placed between different versions of the Earth itself. Now forget everything we have talked about so far. Because the next two ships do not take us back decades. They take us back thousands of years. And one of them may be lying beneath your feet right now. In July of 2010, construction crews were working at full speed in Lower Manhattan. The site was one of the most important construction projects in the United States. Workers were excavating the foundations of the new World Trade Center complex, digging deep into ground that had already witnessed centuries of history. For hours, everything seemed routine. Excavators removed load after load of soil. Concrete fragments emerged, old utility lines appeared, nothing unusual. Then, 6 meters below street level, something unexpected broke through the dirt. Wood, not a pipe, not part of an old building, not buried construction debris. Large wooden beams were protruding from the ground in a pattern that immediately caught attention. The site supervisor halted the excavation. Within hours, archaeologists arrived. What they uncovered was astonishing. Hidden beneath the streets of modern New York was the remains of an actual ship. A real wooden vessel, not a replica, not a decorative structure. A ship that had been buried underground for more than 2 centuries. As excavation continued, the outline became clear. The curved hull, the ribs, the planking, everything pointed to a small merchant vessel that had once sailed the waters around Manhattan. Even more remarkable was the state of preservation. Tool marks left by shipbuilders were still visible in the wood. Fragments of oyster shells were discovered nearby. Cherry pits were found trapped within the soil. Someone had likely eaten a meal aboard this vessel long before skyscrapers existed. Long before Wall Street became the financial center of the world. Long before millions of people crossed Manhattan every day. But the real mystery was not the ship itself. The real mystery was why a ship was buried beneath one of the most expensive pieces of real estate on Earth. The answer forces us to rethink what Manhattan actually is. Most people imagine the island as something permanent, a fixed piece of land surrounded by water. But large sections of Lower Manhattan did not exist a few centuries ago. They were created by humans. During the 18th and 19th centuries, New York expanded its shoreline by pushing it outward into the harbor. Construction waste was dumped into the water. Soil was hauled in. Old buildings were demolished and used as fill. Anything that could help create new land was thrown into the shoreline, including unwanted ships. When a vessel became too old, too damaged, or too expensive to maintain, it was sometimes sunk deliberately and buried beneath layers of fill. Over time, new streets appeared, then warehouses, then offices, then skyscrapers. The harbor disappeared beneath the city. Today, millions of people walk across land that was once underwater. Office towers stand where ships once anchored. Restaurants occupy what used to be open water. And beneath the pavement, hidden from sight, lie the skeletons of forgotten vessels that helped create the city itself. Manhattan is not simply built beside the sea. In many places, it is built on top of it. But if that discovery sounds incredible, the next one pushes the story even further. Not centuries, millennia. In 1954, an Egyptian archaeologist named Kamal el-Malik was working near the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza. The pyramid had already stood for more than 4,000 years. It was one of the most studied structures on Earth. Yet history still had secrets hidden beneath its stones. While examining the pyramid's foundation, el-Malik noticed something unusual. One massive limestone block appeared slightly different from the others. Its placement seemed deliberate. When the block was finally lifted, a sealed chamber was revealed beneath it. What happened next felt less like archaeology and more like opening a time capsule. As the chamber was exposed, workers reported smelling cedar wood. Fresh cedar, as though the space had been sealed days earlier. In reality, it had been sealed for roughly 4,600 years. Inside lay thousands of carefully arranged wooden components. At first they looked like scattered fragments. But they were not random. Each piece had been placed with extraordinary precision. Together, they formed a complete ship. A vessel more than 43 meters long. Every component had been carved from cedar imported from Lebanon, hundreds of kilometers away. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. The preservation was even more astonishing. After years of reconstruction, experts assembled the ship piece by piece. And then they realized something remarkable. This was not a symbolic model. It was not a miniature representation. It was a fully functional vessel. If placed in water, it could theoretically float. Egyptologists called it the solar boat of Pharaoh Khufu. According to traditional interpretations, the vessel was intended to carry the pharaoh through the afterlife alongside the sun god Ra. It was an elegant explanation. A neat explanation. Perhaps too neat. Because there was a problem. The ship showed signs of real use. Wear patterns appeared on the ropes. Abrasion marks existed where moving components had rubbed together repeatedly. The oars displayed grooves consistent with long-term rowing. These were not the marks of an object built solely for ceremony. They were the marks of a vessel that had spent time in actual water. A ship that had been used. The obvious question followed. Used where? Today, the pyramids stand surrounded by desert and urban development. The Nile River lies kilometers away. Finding evidence of a major waterway near the pyramids seems almost impossible. Yet recent geological research has challenged that assumption. Using radar imaging and sediment analysis, scientists discovered evidence of an ancient branch of the Nile that once flowed much closer to the Giza Plateau. Researchers named it the Khufu branch. Thousands of years ago, this channel may have extended to within a few hundred meters of the pyramids. What is now dry desert could once have been an active riverbank. A place where boats arrived daily. A place where stone blocks, workers, supplies, and officials moved by water. If that interpretation is correct, the mystery changes completely. The ship was never stranded in the desert. It was parked at a harbor, exactly where it belonged. Then centuries passed, the river shifted course, water retreated, vegetation disappeared, sand advanced, the harbor vanished. The landscape transformed so completely that future generations forgot the river had ever existed. Only the ship remained, waiting beneath stone, waiting for someone to find it. Two ships, one beneath New York, one beside the Great Pyramid, separated by thousands of years, built by different civilizations, found on different continents, and yet both tell the same story. The ground beneath our feet is not as permanent as it appears. Harbors become city blocks, rivers become deserts, coastlines move, land expands, water retreats. We draw maps as if they capture something final, something stable, something permanent, but every map is only a single frame from a film that never stops moving. 1,000 years from now, many of today's coastlines will look different. Rivers will follow new paths. Entire districts of modern cities may be underwater. Others may stand kilometers inland. And future generations may discover ships in places that make no sense at all. Beneath office towers, under highways, buried in deserts, or hidden beneath layers of earth that have not yet formed. The ships themselves do not move. They simply wait, silent witnesses to a world that no longer exists. And perhaps the strangest thought is this. If archaeologists excavate beneath our cities 2,000 years from now, what evidence will they find that the sea was once here? And which of our modern skylines will become the next forgotten harbor?